Well, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie was on the local New Jersey television show. He defended sending his children to private schools while he's cutting public for funding for the public schools. And one mother, of course, confronted him he gave a very blunt reply. And it got me thinking, he wants the religious element taught to his children, but are private schools better? And he pointed out he already pays for the public school in his neighborhood. Do private schools provide a better education than the public schools, or are high tuition private schools just a status symbol for those who can afford them? And who would do a better job fixing a bad school, the government or a public company? Well, Steve from Effington, Illinois, former student who went to a parochial school when he was a child, now he's a public school teacher, and he says that private schools do offer better education, but it's because parents are paying and therefore more involved. And Steve is our caller of the week.
Private schools do offer better education, but not for the reason that everyone thinks. It's because parents are more likely to be involved because they're paying more money to go. The big difference is that parents, they're paying, in New York, $40,000. They're more than likely going to make sure that whenever the child comes home, they do their homework and that they're studying for tests. Public school, you know, if you're not paying anything or barely anything, it's very easy to just be like, who cares?
Well, to talk more about this topic, Managing Director for Zephyr Capital Management, Jim Awad, and Policy Analyst for Cato Center for Educational Reform, Adam Schaefer. And Jim, let me start with you because, you know, we've kibitzed after various programs here on Fox Business about schools, and you've been very helpful to me about, you know so much about schools here in New York City and private schools. You've sent your children. You just told me you spent a lot of money raising 4 children in private schools. You think you got your dollar's worth?
Yes, absolutely. I think the education, the private school education in New York City is first class by any metric. I mean, look at what you want for your children. You want a good competitive education. You want them to have good standardized testing for when they go to college. You want them to have an opportunity to be properly prepared for college, so you want good college placement. You want good athletics, and you want good extracurricular, and you want them going to school with other kids who are going to benefit them socially and through their life. Now, in some places you can do that in a public school, in some places you can't. So it depends where you live. In Manhattan, it's very hard.
Well,
to
in
do
fact,
it in
you told me there was one particular neighborhood in Manhattan that if I lived in that neighborhood, I could send my children to that particular public school, and it happened to be an exceptional public school.
Yeah, they do exist, but that particular school only goes through the 8th grade.
Adam, what's your take on this public versus private? I mean, the number here in New York is, of course, it's New York City, which is not the normal across the country. This is its own little planet here, but it cracked $40,000 a year for private school tuition. Is that worth it?
Well, I don't know about $40,000, and actually the high-end, high price tag private school is the exception, not the rule in private schooling. Most private schools cost far less than what is spent in public schools, in fact. The typical private school across this country charges about $6,000 in tuition. And that's compared to around $13,000 per student that they're spending in.
But you're going to pay the property tax. You're paying for the public school anyway, so it's on top of that.
It's out of pocket. Right, absolutely. It's still a big burden for parents. That's why I think it's crazy when politicians are attacked for sending their kids to a private school. Well, they're saving public schools a ton of money. They're actually doing a public service there because they're paying out of pocket and still paying their property tax like the governor of New Jersey was talking about. But, the evidence does show that private schools do better, even with low-income, at-risk students, than public schools, and they do it for a fraction of the cost. So, just on efficiency terms, they're far and away better.
How do they do it cheaper? Because the one argument we hear all the time is you got to spend more money on schools in order to get quality education for the future generations. Throw more money at it.
Well, and we all know more money doesn't equal better education. If it did, then Newark would be performing, better than most districts in the country. It's spending around $23,000 per student. D.C. is spending $28,000 per student. It's just terrible. In fact, the worst performing districts usually are some of the highest spending districts. The difference is waste bloat in the public sector. No big surprise. It's run by the government, so there's far more employees than are necessary. They're not as productive. There's been a huge increase in the number of public school employees over the last few decades. Huge increase in overbuilding, bells and whistles on buildings. If you go to a private school, even many very good ones, their buildings are nothing fancy because they're focused on what's important, and that's education, not all the bells and whistles.
Jim, you've sat on the board of some of the private schools that your children have attended. How do you cut through to get that education, and did you have issues regarding unions and other outside influence?
No, there is accountability in the private school sector because there's a head of the school, and the head of the school is chosen by a board and reports to the board, and the board meets regularly on the finances of the school. We look at revenues versus expenses. Where are the expenses? What do we have to raise? What can we cut? Most schools have an operating deficit, so they have to have giving, and the parents have to chip in even more. There's an endowment fund, so you have to properly manage that. So there is a system of accountability in the private school sector. And if you're going to pay that kind of money, you're in with your kids. You're going to do everything you can to make it work. And if you're an underprivileged kid on a scholarship, you've really worked hard to get your child into that school so that they have an opportunity equal to the wealthier kids. So you're going to be all in. So everybody's in it together.
So the
everybody
parents
cares.
are involved in the education of their children, but they're also involved in the running of the school, and that may be the takeaway on all this, but I got to leave it there. But parent involvement, I'll leave it there for Adam Schaefer from Cato. Thank you, Adam, and
Thank
Jim
you very much.
Awad, Zephyr Capital Management. Thanks.